What's up, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another Game of Thrones update video. In this video, I want to go over what Sophie Turner said about Game of Thrones in her recent interview. Although Game of Thrones ended over 5 years ago, there's still a lot of interest and debate regarding this incredibly successful series. And I think most of us would agree, while we may not have been given the ending we all wanted, we still have a lot of love for this show. In fact, most of us would love to see Game of Thrones again in some form or fashion. That's why House of the Dragon's first season was able to break so many records for HBO. There's still millions of fans who love everything A Song of Ice and Fire has to offer. I know I'm not the only fan who is still hoping we see a Game of Thrones sequel one day. When Sophie sat down for her interview at Variety, they asked her if we're ever gonna see Sansa Stark again. Sophie said maybe. I mean, it would have to be the exact same cast, otherwise I wouldn't go back, and that would just be Season 9, and I don't think we're gonna do a Season 9. But I mean, I love being Sansa, and I do often wonder what she would be up to now. I wonder where she would be 5 years later. What would she be doing? Would she still be Queen in the North at Winterfell, and would she be a good ruler? I also wonder if there would be some other kind of terrible war that's happened. I'd love to see it. Well, you're not alone, Sophie. I know I'm not the only Game of Thrones fan who has thought about Sansa, Arya, Jon, and everyone else who survived the final season. Once again, we have another one of Game of Thrones actors who would be open to coming back to Westeros. As I've said in other videos, I believe all of Game of Thrones actors will want to come back eventually. Now that the show has been off the air for over 5 years, most of them have likely already forgot about how exhausting it was to work on the show. In fact, I would bet most of them miss Game of Thrones already. That is why so many of the actors have already said they would love to come back to film another season or even another series set during a different era in Westerosi history. We already know Kit Harington thought about making another Game of Thrones show focused on the life of Jon Snow after the events of the original series. They were developing that show ever since Game of Thrones ended. It actually sounded like the show was nearly done. Unfortunately, they were not able to get the Jon Snow series off the ground. However, it did reveal one thing. As soon as everyone heard about HBO developing a Jon Snow sequel series, almost every Game of Thrones actor who survived the original show said they were ready to come back. The actors who played Jon Snow's best friend, Samwell and Davos, both said they were ready and waiting for their phone to ring. We also heard the same thing from Maisie Williams and Gwendolyn, who we all know as Arya and Brienne.
Okay, I have to ask, Game of Thrones, is there any chance that your character would make an appearance in the new Jon Snow spinoff?
Oh, in the new Jon Snow spin-off? Well, I really don't know about that. I think it depends if Kit Harington remembers quite how many favors he owes me.
Now we know Sophie is thinking about this as well. And I'm sure everyone else would come back if these actors signed up for another season of Game of Thrones. They're not going to want to sit on the sidelines as all their friends go back and have fun without them. Now, Sophie said she would only do it if they were able to bring back the same exact actors. Well, as you already saw, most of them have already said they would love to film in Westeros again. And I still think it could happen. We saw the show Friends do something like this decades after the series ended, and we even saw HBO make a film about Deadwood long after the series aired its final episode. I'm sure the network will remain open to any and all ideas as long as Game of Thrones still has a massive fan base. Now, I know there's a lot of fans who also hate this idea. In fact, many fans were angry about the fact that HBO was even developing a show about Jon Snow. It looks like Sophie doesn't think they're going to make a Season 9 either, but I actually think that is what makes the most sense. It would definitely draw the biggest crowd. While House of the Dragon might be successful, I don't think it'll ever reach the height of Game of Thrones' final season. Imagine how fast the internet would explode if HBO announced they were making another season of Game of Thrones. There's really only one major issue. Cersei Lannister, Daenerys Targaryen, and even the Night King are already dead. Game of Thrones would be missing some of its major ingredients that made the show so amazing. So then you have to wonder, should they make the final season over again? That way they could fix most of the mistakes made by David and Dan? Or should they continue exactly where things ended? Maybe that would only make things worse. The website Screen Rant happens to think Sophie is right. They said almost any version of Game of Thrones would effectively just be Season 9, and that shows the major hurdle to it happening. Although Game of Thrones Season 8 resulted in major backlash, the scale of the show was one unmatched on television, and that would be very difficult to bring back. It would require a lot of moving parts coming together, given the size of the show's cast and crew. And lining up all those schedules, even if they did all want to come back, would be damn near impossible. They go on to say, there's also no guarantee Game of Thrones cast and crew would want to come back anyway. Well, I don't think HBO would have any issues with matching the show's size and scale. As you all know, they're already making House of the Dragon and Dunk and Egg after all. If you ask me, the first season of House of the Dragon looked just as good as the final season of the original show. The only major difference was the size of the budget. Game of Thrones had an endless amount of resources, whereas House of the Dragon has been held back by its own budget. However, even with those limitations, House of the Dragon still looked amazing, and I think it held the standard set by the original show. The size and scale of the show would actually be the least of my concerns if they ever brought it back. As I've already stated, most of the actors said they would come back as well. However, we have only heard from the actors who survived the final season. Therefore, if they did make another season of Game of Thrones, it would have to be set after the events of the finale. It would actually be a lot easier to make Game of Thrones Season 9 because the show no longer has an outrageous amount of actors given the fact that so many of them died during Season 8. It would be a lot harder to remake the final season because they would have to film some of those major battles again. Not only that, but they would also have to bring back a lot of the other actors like Cersei, Jaime, Dany, Varys, and so many others. We don't even know if they would be open to coming back because no one has ever really asked them since they were already dead in the show. Now, I'm sure Varys' actor would love to film the final season over again because we all know he hated his final scenes. I just think there would be so many more moving parts to remaking the final season. And while I know it's what we all want the most, I think it would be more likely to get a Season 9, considering it would be so much easier to film with only a handful of the original actors. Now, I'm sure I'm wasting my time thinking about all this, but I can't help but get excited whenever another Game of Thrones actor opens up about working on the show again. Sophie might not be fully on board just yet, but the fact that she's been thinking about it lets us know she is still open to the idea. I'm sure it would be a lot easier to get all them to sign on if you're able to get all them in a room together. Let me know what you thought about Sophie's interview down below. How many of you actually think Season 9 of Game of Thrones could work? Maybe that's why so many fans want to see a show about the adventures of Arya Stark over in Essos. A show like that could actually work on its own without having to worry about any of the other actors or old sets from the original series. It would be a very different show, but it would at least have one familiar face. Then again, maybe it never happens. I just think HBO will remain open to any and all ideas so long as Game of Thrones still has a massive fanbase. Leave me your thoughts down below. Once again, I have to thank all of you for stopping by and watching another video. I hope all of you have a great day. I will see you again very soon. Bye.